Tensions between the U.S. and Iran remain high after thousands of protesters were massacred during anti-government demonstrations across Iran. But nuclear talks continue as the U.S. attempts to de-escalate a future conflict. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the fact-check team. If we look at the timeline here, Emma, didn't their nuclear program start in like the 50s, around the same time that the U.S. launched the Atoms for Peace strategy? It all happened around the same time.
Yeah, it's been happening for a long time now. It goes back decades. Like you said, according to a report published by the Congressional Research Service, Iran's nuclear program started in the 1950s, and then the United States started kind of getting concerned that Tehran might develop nuclear weapons in the mid-1970s. But then fast forward to 2003, they supposedly shut it down. So since then, U.S. and international watchdogs say Iran hasn't started a formal weapons program, but has continued to with their building of the nuclear capabilities, especially uranium enrichment, which could be used for a weapon. So that's the cause for concern there. So the distinction's important. Iran's not been caught building a bomb, but it definitely has the tools to build one.
So how close have they gotten? I mean, do they have weapons-grade uranium?
So according to the Council on Foreign Relations, Iran doesn't currently have any sort of nuclear weapon, but it's closer than ever in terms of technical capability. The CFR reports that Iran's enriched uranium to about 60%, just short of the roughly 90% needed for a nuclear weapon. U.S. and international analysts also say that Iran could produce enough weapons-grade material in just weeks or even days if it chose to, but turning that material into an actual functioning nuclear weapon could most likely take a lot longer.
Emma, thank you.
Thanks.
And for more on this fact-check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com.
We are tracking the ongoing negotiations in the Middle East this morning between the United States and Iran. Indirect talks happened on Friday in Oman. Now, both sides say the talks are off to a good start, and there's a consensus now that negotiations will continue. The White House has repeated for weeks that for the safety of the United States, Iran cannot restart its nuclear program. Last year, the U.S. launched an aerial assault that took out pretty much their entire nuclear facility. Meantime, over the weekend, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner visited the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is located in the Middle East, both men leading negotiations there with Iran. Iran blasting the United States for moving more firepower into that region. The country's foreign minister even going as far to say, warning the U.S. if it is going to even send more in and more targets, it in fact will target U.S. bases in that region if American forces launch an attack. Later this week, the president is set to host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. Both leaders expected to talk about these ongoing issues with Iran. Jen.
Federal officials are now warning that China is actively infiltrating every corner of American life, from U.S. airspace and cyber networks to universities, research labs, and local communities. Intelligence sources say Beijing is engaged in widespread espionage and aggressively working to steal proprietary information, advanced technology, and sensitive national security secrets. Joining us this morning to break down what this means for America's security and sovereignty is our very own Washington insider, Armstrong Williams. Good morning to you, sir. Great to see you, as always. So we have seen Chinese surveillance balloons. We've seen cyber intrusions, biolabs we just talked about, illegal drugs smuggled into the U.S. We know this is a coordinated strategy. So what should Americans understand about the CCP's long-term goals and how different is their approach to warfare and influence compared to perhaps maybe like a traditional military conflict?
Well, I think the most glaring indication of this is that we often forget is the fact that Governor Kathy Hochul had one of her top aides, who's a Chinese spy, being paid $3 million. And when you can operate at that level and gain that kind of access and meet security clearance, and they infiltrate your systems, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Another aspect we don't talk about, Jan, is how these consulates in Los Angeles or in San Francisco, when Gene came over, and how they were able to bring these threats in, put them in the hotels, and then put them out to protest, to cause disruption, to attack police. These are the kinds of things we don't see. And the hundreds of thousands that came across the border, they never asked for public assistance from our agencies. Where are they? Who take care of them? Who provide for them? And while they're providing for them, what are the expectations for providing everything across the board for them? Those are the things that we ignore. Where are they now? What are they up to? What are they doing? And we're beginning to see it, as you mentioned, the balloons, what happened in Michigan, what happened recently at the lab in Las Vegas. And just think about Jan, think about this. They knew about this from the raid in California 3 years ago. What took so long to finally close down the lab in Vegas? Are we being paid? Are we being bought off? Is somebody being paid to turn another eye away from this kind of crime and behavior? It's really scary.
Yeah, right. Is there a bigger conspiracy involving some lawmakers? What are the most immediate steps the U.S. should be taking right now, Armstrong, to protect our sovereignty and our intellectual property?
We must ban these Chinese nationals from coming in. We talk about deportation criminals and gangs. This is a different kind of crime that's being committed. They should not come on American soil, and we should really go into these different universities and these corporations and make sure that we do a deep dive to investigate just where their loyalty lies. And you will find it's not to the United States of America. And they have to do this or else they will be punished in their own country. It's their job that they're doing. And their loyalty is to China, not America.
That's right, to the CCP, to your point. At the same time, Armstrong, we see Democrats in Congress resisting stronger border security and national voter ID requirements. How does weak internal security compound the risks posed by foreign adversaries like China?
Can you imagine if we start saying you don't need an ID to go through the airport? You don't need the ID to get into a government building. I mean, it's just really insane. You need a government, you need to show an ID if you're a certain age at a bar. It's just what these Democrats have been able to dumb down and make us believe that they're protecting Latinos and blacks because they're disenfranchised. You need an ID for everything because people can vote and say they're you, and they can vote over and over again. We've got to protect the integrity of our election system, Jen. It's just insane what we've been reduced to believe. And the majority of Americans agree with you. That's what every poll has shown. Turning to Iran, Armstrong, we've seen mass protests met with these shoot-to-kill orders, reports of tens of thousands now dead. How do you assess the regime that is killing its own people more effectively than any foreign enemy could? Well, Jan, you know, they've been doing this for the longest. This is nothing new. And our vice president is headed to the region now to try to come up with some kind of agreement on these nuclear arms race with Iran. Iran has announced that they're making progress, but they're also saying there's an imminent threat of war with the United States with this. Aircrafts flying over there, over airspace, Israel being involved. They're telling, even the American embassy has asked all Americans to get out of Iran immediately. What does that tell you? Yeah, and you know, during the Israel-Gaza war, many activists and Democrats used civilian casualties as a rallying cry, and now many of those same human rights voices are silent as Iran carries out brutality at scale against its own citizens. Armstrong, great to talk to you this morning, as always. Hope you have a great week. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Jen. The Department of War is terminating education ties with Harvard, ending all professional military education, fellowships, and certificate programs. War Secretary Pete Hegseth said the university had become too woke, trying to radicalize officers with globalist agendas.
Today, this university, with such a unique history, which receives billions of our federal tax dollars, is one of the red-hot centers of hate America activism. Why should the War Department support an environment that's destructive to our nation and the principles that the vast majority of Americans hold dear? The answer to that question is that we should not. And as a result, Hegseth also said the Army, Navy, and Air Force will evaluate any existing graduate programs for active duty service members at all universities in the coming weeks as well. Lawmakers are warning the U.S. is facing a new kind of threat from illegal labs in American neighborhoods and fake scientific research slipping into government programs. National News Desk's Angela Brown joins us right now to explain, and the CCP behind it all. This is terrifying.
You're right, because you talk about these labs. They're in regular communities in people's neighborhoods like Las Vegas, and then you have this so-called could be fake science that could weave its way into our research here in America, and this is all driving new calls in Congress for stronger biosecurity safeguards.
This story hits closer to home than you may think. We're not talking about threats overseas, but warnings from lawmakers about what could be inside your community or even inside the research we trust. It starts in Las Vegas, where a suspected illegal biolab was found.
It wouldn't take much of these deadly pathogens to kill thousands of Americans.
That's one reason why Senator Tom Cotton and Senator Amy Klobuchar are now pushing bipartisan legislation to tighten who can get access to dangerous biological materials and who they can give it to.
That's why I've introduced legislation to try to put more controls in place to make sure that anyone who is dealing in these pathogens knows their end user and is only giving it to certified and responsible parties. Again, like our national labs, like our military, like research universities.
But it's not just happening in neighborhoods. On Capitol Hill, Republicans on the House Science Committee say the U.S. could also be facing a threat from fake science. They sent letters to multiple agencies, including the U.S. Department of Energy, warning that China-linked paper mills may be pumping fraudulent studies into American academic journals, studies that could affect real taxpayer-funded research.
Now, from the outside, these two incidents, they're not connected, but overall, when you look at the big picture, Republicans say together they highlight a larger problem, China's potential reach into American academic scientific information and also public health spaces.
Yeah.
I'm national correspondent Kayla Gaskins on Capitol Hill. The national debt is climbing at a staggering pace. A new congressional report shows the debt grows by more than $6 billion a day.
The national debt continues ticking in the wrong direction, now on track to hit the $39 trillion mark by April 12th. New data from congressional Republicans shows the debt increases on average $6.43 billion per day. Interest payments on the debt consume about 13% of the entire federal budget. Government watchdogs say this path is not sustainable.
That number just seems like bananas, and it is. It is a national security problem. It's an economic problem.
The National Taxpayers Union is renewing its call for a balanced budget amendment, arguing it could be the strongest tool to curb what it calls Washington's chronic overspending.
Just the notion that the Congress shouldn't spend more in expenditures than it takes in tax revenues each and every year. That's basically the premise that most families abide by.
A recent National Taxpayers Union poll found a majority of Americans, 54%, say cutting government spending is the best way to tackle the debt. Just 13% said raising taxes is the answer. Others are floating more unconventional solutions. Last week, Medicare and Medicaid Administrator Dr. Mehmet Oz suggested the national debt could be reduced if Americans worked longer and delayed retirement.
To start working a year earlier, right out of high school, or work a year later, not retire, it would generate about $3 trillion. $3 trillion to the U.S. economy. That would more than remove the debt.
Elon Musk has argued that only artificial intelligence and automation can prevent what he calls a financial collapse.
We are 1,000% going to go bankrupt as a country and fail as a country without AI and robots. Nothing else will solve the national debt.
Musk's Department of Government Efficiency did find billions of dollars in government waste and fraud, but even he admits it's extremely difficult to cut enough waste to change the big picture national debt problem. On Capitol Hill, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
I'm Atra al-Nashar at the White House. Iranian officials are openly speculating about a potential conflict with the United States ahead of a meeting between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The new comments come as the U.S. and Iran are attempting to use diplomacy to resolve disagreements about Iran's nuclear program. The United States and Iran pursuing a peaceful route to settling tensions. Both, however, making it known they're not afraid of the alternative.
We are men of diplomacy, but we are men of war, too.
The U.S. wants to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. Iran wants the U.S. to lift sanctions detrimental to its economy. The first indirect talks were mediated by Oman last week.
I think Iran looks like they want to make a deal very badly, as they should. Last time they decided maybe not to do it, but I think they probably feel differently.
President Trump referring to failed talks last year preceding U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. A spokesperson for Iran's armed forces saying this on state TV Monday.
We are not going to surrender to U.S. pressure and to U.S. demands.
While the diplomatic process plays out, he says they stand ready to respond to potential U.S. military action, which President Trump has said is not off the table.
Certainly, this time the response will be much more decisive. We will create economic problems and issues for the United States.
When it comes to the substance of these talks, a top source of tension is Iran's ballistic missile program. Iran refuses to discuss it.
The missile is something that is defensive. We cannot talk about defensive matters, not now and not in the future.
Back in Washington, President Trump preparing to host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House Wednesday. Netanyahu's office says the prime minister believes any negotiations must include limitations on ballistic missiles and a halting of the support for the Iranian axis. The outcome of these talks, which may resume as soon as this week, could come down to the red lines the U.S. and Iran are drawing on Iran's enrichment of nuclear material. Iran says they have the right to do this and that it's for peaceful purposes only. President Trump says it cannot be tolerated, even at the lowest level. At the White House, I'm Atra El-Nashar.